I was in a situation where I was going to lead a new business effort for the company I was with at the time. In the sort of final moment, I was approached by my manager and told that maybe I shouldn't be the one leading it. And when I probed a little bit more as to why, I was told that the company might stand a better chance of winning if the person who led the new business effort looked like the person on the client side.
Welcome to ABCDEI, a podcast that explores topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion through stories of distinct and powerful lived experiences.
If you are tired of the preaching, shaming, and theory about why inclusion matters and just want to create change already, then you're in the right place.
Join us as we unlearn bias one alphabet at a time. My name is Susan Diaz.
And I'm Rohini Mukherjee.
Hello and welcome back to ABCDEI. Rohini and I are reflecting for a moment on 3 seasons. This is episode 30. Rohini, and we've kept at this podcast, learning as we go for 30 episodes. Where are you at with your thoughts on the subject?
I mean, I think it's been incredible. And I think back to your point, I think our own learning and unlearning, I've definitely had moments of humility along the way where I've said, oh, I'm definitely guilty of saying that or thinking that. And I have checked some of the things I say and some of the ways I think. So I hope, if we're impacting people with just that approach of rethinking and reframing the way we say the things we do, then to me, that's exactly why we started this, right?
Right. I 100% agree. So for today's episode, we wanted to focus a little bit on, we've talked a lot about the need for introspection from each of us and, how the onus needs to sort of come to us as individuals, as opposed to just being like, oh, somebody told me to say this, or the public said this is not acceptable, or, I'm not allowed to speak that way in my company, being your motivator, sort of thinking about how you yourself can sort of get better at some of this. And I think theoretically, we've talked a lot, Rohini, about how ignorance is not an excuse anymore. And just saying, oh, my intentions were great and it just didn't translate, perhaps isn't enough. So today we wanted to sort of like illustrate that a little bit from an example in each of our lives, a professional example, like an example that we come to contact with more than once, unfortunately. So do you want to start and set it up, and then I'll go and we'll just see what it is that we can learn from these experiences, and then potentially how you can advocate for yourself if you're in these situations.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, just to go back to one of the reasons we want to share this is being vulnerable, right? And, we are growing DEI, advocates, I wouldn't say experts, but certainly on the way. But it happens to all of us. And I think it's important, and we were talking about this, it's important for us to be transparent about some of our own mistakes, but also some of the microaggressions we are on the receiving end of. So mine, happened not very long ago. And I think for both of us, the incidents we're going to share were what really kickstarted our fire to start this podcast. So mine was, I was in a situation where I was going to lead a new business effort for the company I was with at the time. And, in the sort of final moment, I was approached by my manager and told that maybe I shouldn't be the one leading it. And when I probed a little bit more as to why, I was told that, the company might stand a better chance of winning if the person who led the new business effort looked like the person on the client side. I think my reception in the moment was certainly shock. And then it went to, disgust pretty quickly. I remember thinking I should call this person in rather than call them out first, because sometimes we say things and we don't realize, the impact of those words or those actions. And I did. And I said, this doesn't feel right. Is this really about how I look? And the person sort of dodged it and just said, no, I'm just trying to maximize our chances of success. Don't, be so sensitive. And that has never sat well with me. I mean, fast forward a few months later, and we started a podcast to specifically, correct some of those behaviors. And so, I think as I think about that moment, a couple years on, I think where the intention came from, which I can now say with a little bit more neutrality with the passage of time, was the instinct to win, right? And that in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? Wanting to win, wanting to set up for success, not a bad thing. But when it comes down to, if we take you off, that's a better chance, that's where it gets really slippery. So come back to more reflecting, because I think there are some commonalities, even though our situations were quite different, but maybe we'll come back to that after you share the incident that happened to you.
Yeah. So with me, as a small business owner and operator, conversations with banks is where I find it most sobering. And I wish this was a one-off situation, but this has happened to me more than once. And, since in Canada, it's not exactly hard to figure out who our financial institutions are. It's been from the big 5 banks and, the business development banks and various banks like that. So typically, here's how it goes. If I am like, okay, here are my plans, here's where I need a bit of cash flow, and I'm looking for debt funding in some way. The first sort of obstacle that would be put in my way is a request for guarantorship in some way from my husband. So not like, ooh, is there someone who can sign or any of that? And I know we're going to dig into that in a second, but it'll straight away be an assumption that your husband's going to need to co-sign this, or provide the guarantee that's going to be required, and that irritates me. Like on a few occasions, I've said, "Is there any detail in terms of like how does that increase? Like, is it if I didn't have a husband, would I then get half of this, and am I going to get double because he's in the picture?" None of that sort of clarity. And to your point, when you're in that moment, it's hard to come back with questions which are logical and thought through. You're just caught off guard. And, I really think that needs to change. Like on a few occasions, I've been mad and ranted at the person concerned and said, this needs to change. And honestly, as I'm doing that, I'm thinking, this guy who's sitting at the end of this telephone call has no power. Like he's not going to be able to change the systems of that large bank, but he's also woefully ill-equipped to be dealing with this one-on-one situation. Right. So that's my experience. Like I said, it happens quite a few times. And I've tried to break that down, by the way, a little bit to be like, what is it? Is it because I'm female? Is it because I'm BIPOC? Is it because I'm an immigrant? Regardless, even if it's the Venn diagram of those 3 things that makes me hyper high risk or whatever it is, according to the banking language, it's just communicated poorly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I'm so sorry that happened and happens, I should say. But I think, in the spirit of being vulnerable, let's maybe talk about, some of the common elements in those 2 situations, and both for the person approaching that conversation with power, as well as the person on the receiving end of that conversation who perhaps needs to or doesn't have the confidence to advocate for themselves. Let's break down some of those things. So, I mean, one of the things that, I had said and you talked about as well is being transparent about the end goal. So for a bank, that is a certain level of financial stability. For, a client service organization, that is a certain win rate. Those in and of themselves as end goals are not bad things. Right. But I think then saying, this is what needs to happen. Let's either collaborate on a solution or let me work for you and find a way to make that happen. And perhaps asking some other questions with a little bit more or perhaps a little bit less bias. So are you in a relationship where there might be, additional financial backing, right? That could be a parent, that could be a child, that could be a partner, that could be a friend, that could be anything. But asking more open-ended questions. Similarly, in my situation, it is looking at it and saying, okay, well, one person, the person that leads, doesn't make or break a business win. So overall, do we have the correct sector experience? Do we have the right seniority in the room? Do we have the right people who have that knowledge of either that geography or are there prior relationships that are worth respecting and keeping in the room? Those are not bad questions. Those are good, exploratory, sensible questions. But being transparent about the end goal and then either collaborating on a solution or just asking more thoughtful questions rather than formulaic questions that are steeped in bias.
Yeah. So I think you've said that well over there. Pretty much either of these situations, hard as they are, could be navigated better by making those goals transparent. So if you're in these situations, then we said we'll try to put it down into like some sort of a framework of like, I don't know, 3 points for like, if you're in these situations, how do you start advocating for yourself, right? And I think the first is what Rohini laid out there, which is that if the goal, the criteria or the parameters are not clearly laid out, they're not transparent, then you certainly should advocate for yourself. I think you certainly should ask more questions, try to get a better sense of clarity, and then keeping emotions in check at this point and, coming to it from a position of strength is important, I think. And then that second point we talked about is when it feels personal. And in both of these cases, I think the reason for the icky, slightly gross feeling and, having to rethink about it so many times for ourselves as well is because it does feel personal. And I liked the way you'd said it when we were in the green room, Rohini, where you were saying, what does that mean, personal? Is that too vague? Like, is that too sort of like non-specific? Well, if it feels like the thing that's being said to you is Rohini specific, or the thing that is being said to me is Susan specific, then that's when you want to worry. Do you want to explain that a little bit so people understand that a bit better?
Yeah, I think if you look at the criteria for elimination or criteria for not being, selected to get a loan, to lead a piece of business, break it down into why. So let's take the bank example. If the minimum criteria is an income of $100,000, right? That is a sensible and logical cutoff. Now, of course, that may have some caveats to it, but then that becomes about a certain earning potential. It does not become about your immigrant identity, the fact that you're a woman, the fact that you may or may not be married. It is more general. Similarly, if in my situation, the entire team that was presenting was looked at, or even, just to say, okay, we are looking at this sector. Do we have this sector represented? So that you can say, hey, listen, we're really looking for somebody with strong financial services experience. That does not become personal. That means a lot of people could be eliminated based on that. That's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not saying banks should be wishy-washy in their criteria. Yes. In the interest of inclusion. It is, how do you be transparent and how do you make it so that it is criteria that could be applied to a wide variety of people, not just, hey, immigrants need not apply or women need not apply.
And I think that right there leads us to the third point of our framework for when to advocate for yourself, which is if you wouldn't put it on the public domain, then it shouldn't be said to you. So if something about who need not apply to a loan wouldn't go on a form, or, BIPOC business leads will not be allowed to go to presentations, are not going to be on your conference room like bored, then it shouldn't be delivered to you as a message either. So I think that's pretty important to remember that. So in terms of sort of moving forward, like we've talked a little bit, and I think people understand minimum viable product really well. Like it is a minimum acceptable quality of something before you put it out to the world, right? And I really think we can all use that in our approach to inclusion learning. Like each of us, if we are interacting in a workplace, in a social instance, you are sort of beholden to bring with you a minimum viable amount of knowledge. That means no microaggressions in terms of like calling people she when they said they, or, saying, I don't know what you people call yourselves, or I don't know how to pronounce that Ghanaian last name, or, all the self-deprecatory, how could I possibly know that? That definitely needs to change. It needs to evolve beyond that. And so, we would submit that the way to do that is when you take away some of the threat from it, where you're not feeling threatened, where you're not feeling like, if I get this wrong, I fail. And instead you're starting to look at it as learn. Like, screw learning like an adult. Let's learn like a child, right? That's what we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if I also think about, resumes, right? Where now you look at, everybody has this line in there that says, proficient in Microsoft, proficient in, these things, proficient in like inclusive language should be the goal, right? If we have that, and that becomes a basic criterion for hiring somebody, then we're going to be in a much better place. And I think it's also, if our generation's biggest complaint is adulting is hard, absolutely, embrace childlike learning, and you got to start somewhere, right? Some of us have different lived experiences where we might have a little bit of an edge in one lived reality, but there's no excuse for not having that. Because even, when I look at, you and me, we know the immigrant experience, we know the female experience, we know the South Asian experience. Our experiences are different too. But that doesn't mean that we sit on our laurels and say, well, I know 3, so I'm good, right?
So
there's
good,
no literacy rate. It's continuous improvement.
It is continuous improvement. And, based on the bodies of work of people like James Clear and Atomic Habits, it has to be done a little at a time. And that's what I think becomes exponential. And for us, like we said, learning like a child, the easiest method is sort of taking it one piece at a time. Like A is for allyship. Let's break down what allyship looks like. And then, A is for anti-Black racism. And you want to if that is what you need to be studying for your current needs. Like, for example, you're in a workplace and a number of your colleagues are people of color from various different parts of the world, and that is not something that you're familiar with. Then start there. Start by saying, let me improve some of my basic knowledge, my general knowledge, if you will, like about these cultures, about these people, about ask questions. And again, we've talked over 29 episodes about how questions are a good thing, provided you're asking them in the right tone with an intention to learn. And then also not expecting someone else to educate you because you didn't Google that yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if we do all these, we will live equitably ever after. The new goal.
I agree. I think we should all be aspiring to that. Equitably ever after, folks. Thank you for joining us for 3 whole seasons.
If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to hit subscribe and please drop us a review. If you want to learn more about us or the ABC DEI podcast, visit abcdei.ca.